today's episode of Best Friends at Work, Naomi, Mel, and I speak with Kenya Salaudeen, the founder and CEO of Agree to Agree. As a professional mediator with a background in human resources, Kenya spoke to us about navigating conflict. She emphasized the complexities of conflict, which are influenced by individual experiences, emotions, and cultural differences, and that we shouldn't be afraid of it. What really hit for us was that conflict, for all of us, even in the workplace, starts at the very beginning, at home, during our childhood.
You know, many of us are raised to manage or not manage conflict in certain ways. Some of us don't want to address conflict at all because that's just what we learned growing up. Like, be the better person, be the bigger person, be the first person to extend the olive branch. And sometimes that means, or it's translated into avoiding the conflict altogether. Right. So, the way we're raised really does influence how we act when it comes to conflict.
Stay with us as we share family stories, work stories, and discuss how the best way to manage conflict effectively, both at home and at work, is by embracing it. I'm Lorin. Please join me and my best friends at work, Naomi Lippin and Mel Boyd-Brown, where we invite experts to talk about work, life, and leadership, and how to do them better. Hey, Mel, how are you? Hi, Naomi.
Good, thank you. I'm good. I'm glad it's the end of the week. It's been a busy week, so I'm happy.
It has been a busy week for you. And today I'm a little discombobulated for some reason. Oh, like not in
It's
my
Friday or Friday, as we like to say.
Friday, right? Naomi, how are you?
Good enough, and I'm not surprised that you're a little discombobulated. It's been pretty intense week. Um, so yeah, h- mostly here and a little bit not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we should let our listeners know that while um, they're seeing this recording at a different time in the calendar than when we're recording. So this was the USA election week, as you know, Mel, our resident Canadian here.
Indian neighbor, right?
So, it's certainly impacting some people differently than others, and I think it's wildly interesting. Our guest today, right, who is an expert in conflict management. I keep thinking, like, every time we have a guest, it's like really bizarre timing because it seems to be coming just on and on around, things that are going on in either our lives or, the world itself. So.
Kismet, I think is what they call that.
Kismet, yeah. Yeah, so I'm really curious to hear what she's going to say today about, about this topic. 'Cause I'm wondering, does this impact, you know, how politics might impact the workplace and the conflict around that potentially. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah,
know.
I'm so actually excited to talk to her. I have like so many questions. It feels like the election aside, it's such a relevant topic if we think about the
Mhm.
way that work has changed so much
Right.
in the last 20 years. I'm fascinated to hear her take on how that has also influenced how we manage conflict, right? And how
Right.
we work through
Hmm.
it.
I was
Mhm.
I was at an event
Really good
last night.
points, Mel. Yeah,
Yeah. I
really
was
good
at an
points.
I was at an event last night, and one was talking about how she has clients come in, and she works in banking, and she'll have clients come in and they want to talk, politics. And she kind of asked the table, she goes, I wonder what happened to a long time ago. You didn't bring up religion or politics. And she says now it's like people are free to do that. But I know in Europe, politics is talked about quite more frequently than as in the US. But you know, Kenya will talk about way more than just that.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about having
Okay.
her join us. Shall we introduce her or?
Absolutely. Let's
All
let's let's
right.
just get right into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners want to hear what she has to say than us just natter on, right?
Our nathering's kind of fun, but yeah, let's bring her
Hey,
on.
you're right. We're smart. We're good too, right? All right. So okay, I must apologize. I reached out to her to ask her how to pronounce her last name correctly. And I think I shut down my email before I got the answer back, and I should have probably done it a little bit sooner. But her name is Kenya Salaudeen, and I think I might have done that correctly. Founder of Agree to Agree, which is a human resource um, conflict management type organization. So she's a human resources consultant, a conflict coach, family relationship, small business, and workplace mediator, and an expert trainer around all of those topics and others. With nearly 25 years experience as a human resources executive and management consultant, she provides consultation for strategic planning, employee and labor relations matters, talent sourcing, onboarding and offboarding, recruitment and staffing, policy, process, and systems design. Through professional coaching, she helps individuals meet their professional and personal development needs. So Kenya coaches and provides conflict resolution services to employers, employees, parents, couples, families in conflict. And she works, right across the United States, so nationwide. I mean, much like a lot of people do nowadays um, with um, with our lovely internet capabilities. And she's worked across numerous industries. So she's not even industry specific. It sounds like she's people specific, much like we are. Um, and additionally, she's a member of the Council of State Government's Justice Center as a senior leadership team member. And
Wow.
her bio goes on and on and on. She has quite an amazing history. So,
Very
if
accomplished. Very
yeah,
accomplished.
yeah. And if our
Yeah.
listeners are really interested in her, I highly, find her on LinkedIn, find her on her
Yeah.
her website. She's got an amazing background. So I'm excited to welcome Kenya to our lovely podcast. And I've just admitted her into our amazing room. And we just introduced you, Kenya, and your long list of accolades. And we are so excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here. Hi, Naomi, Mel.
Hi. We're
Thank
thrilled to
you.
have you. Um, and I have so many questions
I
actually.
know. So I saw Kenya speak at a recent event about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, and she had the audience like hooked, mesmerized, engaged, and I just thought like she was amazing with what she had to say around conflict and how it impacts people and how it impacts your own brain. And so, Kenya, I'm so excited and happy that you came and joined us.
Thank you. I really am excited to be here. It's strange, but conflict is actually something I enjoy talking about.
Well, that's good because we have a lot of questions about it for you. If I could kick us off, what I'm fascinated about, Kenya, and people listening, I think probably are too, is like, how did you get into this work of conflict? Because a lot of
Yeah,
people try to avoid it and like go the other direction, but you dive in. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, first thing is conflict is inevitable. Like we can't avoid it. So we may as well face it, right? And so for me, really early on in my career, I was actually facilitating workplace mediation, and I didn't know there was a phrase to describe that work. But as I progressed in my career, I ended up meeting with this administrative law judge, and
Mm-hmm.
happened to be over like a workplace conflict resolution program. And he formally introduced me to the practice of workplace mediation. He also invited me to speak with his law students. He also taught and about ethical issues in HR. And it turned out that while I shared some of my knowledge with those students, they actually shared with me their knowledge about small claims mediation and other types of mediation. And so I got super interested in it. And I went ahead and I started out with taking a basic mediation training, and then different conflict resolution trainings, and then acquired some certifications, and it just kind of blossomed from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's actually quite extraordinary when you think about that. Like the fact that you saw this opportunity and you went into it when most of us don't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's been a part of the work that I was doing as a human resources professional. Um, I just didn't know there was a proper term for it. And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm honest, I think I was sort of losing my passion for human resources, and it just reignited this passion in me. That
Mm-hmm.
there's another way to actually help the people that I work with, to help my clients, which are employees, in a different kind of way, in a way that wasn't punitive. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. So we looked at, of course, your LinkedIn and your website, and particularly on your website, you talk about the fact that conflicts, or you state that conflicts are complicated.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit more about that? We're really curious about what you mean by that.
Yeah, they are complex. And it's because, conflict involves a variety of factors. So some of those factors may be the fact that people bring their own unique viewpoints, their unique experiences, and that leads to different opinions and interpretations of the same situation. So that's one factor. Also, emotions like anger, frustration, fear, all of those can escalate conflict and they can cloud judgment. And a lot of times, in fact, most times, there are deeper underlying issues at play. So there might be some past grievances that these folks have had, or they have some unmet needs, or that adds layers of complexity to it. And then
Mhm.
not, you can't talk about conflict without the fact that a lot of times there's just poor communication that hinders the resolution. Either I don't know how to talk about it, I can't talk about it, it's uncomfortable to talk about it. If you're thinking about the workplace, there are power dynamics that exist, right? And
Mhm.
so that makes getting to a fair resolution really challenging. And when you insert cultural differences in that, right, then that really can affect conflict styles and expectations for how people are supposed to react, how they're supposed to respond
Mhm.
in conflict. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's very complex. It's very
Mhm.
complicated.
Mhm.
Kenny, do you
Mhm.
think that like values and belief systems can also be a huge thing? Because I think about like everybody kind of carries around their own little rule book, right?
Yeah.
And that rule book is a closed book. It's not like we can sit there and read everyone's rule books. And so sometimes, the conflict can just be misunderstanding around stuff like that. Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's the misunderstanding. Many of us are raised to manage or not manage conflict in certain ways. Some of us don't want to address conflict at all because that's just what we learned growing up. Like, be the better person, be the bigger person, be the first person to extend the olive branch. And sometimes that means, or it's translated into avoiding the conflict altogether. Right. So, yeah, I mean, the way we're raised really does influence how we act when it comes to conflict.
Mm.
Mhm.
And then
And
also, oops, I'm sorry.
no, you go ahead.
I wanted to add some more. I'm thinking also about like
Yeah.
cultural competencies and
Mhm.
social intelligence, right? Those
Mhm.
all play a really big role in how we address the conflict itself or the individuals that we're in conflict with. Yeah, so many factors.
Mhm.
And what
Mhm.
I loved about when you brought up like the social intelligence piece as well, and it made me think also about like emotional intelligence
Mhm.
and that role that like that plays in conflict resolution. How do you help your clients strengthen their social and their emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so I guess well, my services are kind of split in two, right? There's the human resources consulting aspect of what I do, and then there's also the conflict resolution aspect of what I do. So when I'm thinking about my clients and I'm thinking about it from the human resources consulting perspective, my clients will be organizations. They could be small, mid, large sized organizations who just don't have human resources at all. Or maybe they have human resources, but it's a small team or it's an inexperienced team. So I come in and I support them. In those instances, it's really about working very closely with them, Also helping to shore up and build the capacity, whatever level they have, the capacity that they have to begin with. So I'm kind of meeting them where they are and then working with them to help them to identify different ways of dealing with conflict. And the social intelligence part, again, if you're thinking about the workplace, I think nowadays social intelligence, although we may not call it that, it's how you interact with other people. You might think of it as like just kind of knowing how to work with people. You might think of it as it's a sixth sense, or it's some other kind of thing. And sometimes there's intentional training around that when you're in the workplace, and that's where the cultural competence part comes into play. So it's me working side by side, hand in hand with my clients to help them to identify ways of either shoring up the services that they have, the HR services that they have, or just bringing some new trainings or things like that to them. On the conflict resolution side, when it's not a business, it could be individuals, it could be families. Mediation and conflict resolution, to many people's surprise, there's a litany of different types of mediation, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll have small business mediation. I'm a customer and I feel like I've overpaid for this service, or the service provider didn't, do everything they said they were supposed to do. And I think I want my money back. Like, that's one type of mediation or conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And then you have relationships, you have families, you have siblings, you have parents, partners. And when those don't get along, it transitions into divorce mediation. Right? You have elder care. There's so many different types of mediation. So when I'm dealing with individuals, how I work with them is if the parties are all in tune and they're all they're aligned in terms of wanting to resolve the conflict, that's a great situation to kind of be pulled into, because they already have a foundation that says that they want to figure out a way to work through this. And maybe they don't understand how what they've said or what they have done, rub the other person the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And so it's for me to kind of step in and help to facilitate the conversation and bring up the points that have been difficult for them to bring up on their own. Mm-hmm. But if, only one person is really interested in resolving the conflict and the other isn't, well, then that means that maybe I just step in as a coach and I'm coaching the individual on how to have the appropriate types of conversations when it comes to conflict, so that they can deliver the message of what they're experiencing or what they want out of conciliation. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Yeah, it did. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about the fact that, like, there's so much change that we've all been going through over the last 10, 15 years. And and even like technology changes, like we work hybrid now. Some of us work only remotely. We might not even know the people we work with. Like Naomi and I have never met.
Yeah.
We have ever like interacted through Zoom, right?
And Mel, you and I knew each other for almost 3 years before we met.
Years before we met in person. Yeah, right. So like we now have people working. It's much more common to be working on, global teams where you're working across time zones, different cultures. You're flat organization. So I was talking to a client just yesterday who has 3 bosses, not one, right?
Yeah,
so like
that whole matrix.
Yeah, big
situation, right? Yeah.
Yeah. As you think about the work you've done over the last 25 years, I'm just curious, like, what kind of these shifts in how we work together, how do you think it impacts our ability to manage conflict?
Oh, well, I think the pandemic really threw so many of us into a different phase, a different stage of needing to learn a lot of things for the first time, or kind of brush up on skills that we may have had. Pre-pandemic, there were remote workers, right? There were people who work remotely, or there are those global enterprises that, the only way that many of their staff would communicate is virtually. But the pandemic certainly kind of just pushed us all the way into it, and we didn't have a choice. And so what's different now is, pre-COVID or pre-pandemic, you'd be in a room, conference room, office, whatever it is, with those folks who are really having a tough time, and you're talking and you're trying to communicate with them. And then maybe if it gets a little bit too heated, you want to take a break, or you do something called caucusing, where you take, you're meeting with them individually. So you leave the room, so that's one thing. But now that we're all virtual, there are ways to do that, but there are other nuances that maybe we didn't take into consideration before because we didn't have to. Like, what does it mean if I'm, doing a virtual mediation and I do this, right? Or I do this, right? I mean, I'm not a body language expert, but people read into those things. And so maybe I'm doing this because my back hurts, not because I'm disinterested or disengaged,
or people don't have their cameras on.
Yeah. So,
and then people make assumptions about what that means too.
Right. Yeah. So it's having to learn, a different way of communicating, and also a way of being more direct and inquisitive, and say, well, what does that mean? Just ask. Are you no longer interested because you're doing this? And give the person the opportunity to kind of let you know where they stand and why they're doing that. So certainly there are a lot of changes, as we transitioned into a more virtual world, and caucusing. So now we have all these breakout rooms, right? So it's not a matter of, just leaving the room. That's a little bit scary though, because you can't get up and walk out, right? I'm here until somebody puts me into a breakout or I turn my camera off, right? So yeah.
So, it's interesting. Naomi, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a team at our last, so Naomi and Kenya used to work together full time at an organization.
Okay.
And there was a team that did not have very good engagement scores. They did not like each other. They didn't get along. They didn't really have to kind of work together. And when we went remote, they were in the jobs that could go and work from home and go remote.
They loved it, huh?
Oddly enough, their engagement scores increased because they only had to deal with each other on work matters only. And they didn't have to interact with each other. And the leader was very good about touching base with every single person on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
They didn't see any favoritism because they're not seeing the leader work with anyone else. And their engagement scores actually went up, which I thought was really interesting because it got rid of all the stories.
Yeah. Oh, well, they still exist. That grapevine.
Oh, I'm sure. But many
deep.
of them, it was like, but I'm saying, like, sometimes, remote could increase conflict, and sometimes it could decrease it.
It's true. A lot of the stories that we hear about how, the pandemic and just going mostly remote or being in a more virtual world has impacted folks is on the negative side, but there were positives that came out of it for those types of employees, individuals who would much rather just kind of dig in and do their work and not deal with, that having to be in, live and in color with another person and having to interact with them in that way. It gives people more choices. Now that, then you have to deal with the culture of the organization and whether or not that behavior is acceptable. But for many people, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
That virtual world is good.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question just about organizations, because you're in and out of lots of different organizations in the work that you do. And I'm wondering, like, when you think about the clients that you see, what strategies are companies using that's working?
So
maybe what's not working too.
I mean, there are strategies that are actually working, and then there are many that aren't, right? And so what I found is that the ones that are working, they're using a variety of strategies in order to manage conflict. And their effectiveness, it really does depend on the specific situation and how well they implement their strategies. So some really effective strategies I've found include open communication. Again, communication is always like key, right? And when there's an open communication type of environment or culture that encourages transparency and honest dialogue. And it helps people to address those issues, those conflicts before they escalate. I like the idea of managers having regular check-ins with their folks and establishing a safe space for the employees to kind of voice their concerns. That's crucial, right? Giving them an opportunity to feel like they're being heard. But at times when organizations realize that they can't manage the conflict on their own, they may not have the capacity or the skill set or whatever, then mediation and facilitation is a really great strategy, involving a neutral third party to come in and to help resolve those conflicts, right? And that makes sure, again, that everybody feels heard and everybody feels respected, and there isn't this idea that there's favoritism. And policies and procedures in the workplace, right? I mean, it could honestly be a double-edged sword. I'll tell you how it could be the sword part in a minute, but like when the policies and procedures are clear, then that means we're looking at ensuring that there's consistency and there's fairness in the way that conflicts are handled within that organization, right? And remembering that the conflict is, you have to remove the personal aspect of it out and focus on the common goal or resolving, which should be resolving that business problem, right? And that helps the team to be aligned, and it reduces those personal differences because it's the business problem that we're focusing on. What doesn't work too well, what hasn't worked too well, is avoidance, right? And we talked about that earlier on, like, or ignoring the conflict. You can't ignore it. That's not going to make it go away, right? So avoiding it, ignoring the conflict, that leads to unresolved issues. And again, when they're not resolved, they get worse. They don't get better. It gets worse. Or let's say the organization has, they do make a really good effort to follow up on the conflict and try to address it, or rather to address the conflict, but then they don't follow up, right? When they don't follow up after that, then the issues, they occur again, they're recurring, right? And that's why monitoring and support and check-ins, all those things really are, they're essential. Let's say that we are looking at the policies and the procedures and making sure that we are practicing them and we're consistent, but if we have this over-reliance on the policies, right? When we think about the fact that there really can be some unique aspects to each situation, then maybe we're going to be too rigid. And maybe the solutions that we always put into play are ineffective in this situation. So there are ways to do it right and ways that maybe aren't so great.
Yeah, like when companies make a policy based on the behavior of 2 or 3 people.
That's right.
And then they punish the whole workforce, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe not punish, but they subjugate in some ways the whole organization based upon the actions of 2 or 3 people. And then that could be detrimental,
Yeah.
So I have,
sorry,
let me
Naomi.
I have a question that just to build on that,
Yeah.
that kind of concept of, even one department having an issue and in an organization, and then the whole organization kind of having to go through, usually the solution is training in that kind of circumstance. So I'm curious, from your experience, number one, how often have you seen that? Because as someone who has worked in organizations all my life, I saw that often. I'm curious if you have. Also curious about how effective you have seen that be.
Yeah. Trainings, I think in those more, I don't know, in those organizations that are at a more mature level in their development, they will think about training, right? The newer organizations may not. It's just call somebody in to help us fix it because they don't know where to go. And that can work, but then what training are you sending these folks to, right? The idea of conflict management or strategic conflict management training, I don't know that that's a popular type of training. Like, you have to know that that's the kind of training you want to find or have someone facilitate for your folks. So I think a really good way of ensuring that there is like a constructive conflict management strategy for the organization really does start at the top, but doesn't everything, right? It starts at the top. So, it's about, the leadership being intentional about wanting to become a mediating organization instead of just responding to conflicts in, again, ways that are punitive or just ignoring it or just sending someone to training and never following up. And the way that's done really is by like inculcating some conflict resolution techniques into the culture. It's systemic, right? And I think if they're able to do that, then there are probably 3 primary techniques that they want to exercise and that they can train their folks on. The first one is managerial mediation. And that's when the managers take those personalities out of the conflict and they facilitate a business meeting about a business problem, right? And then they don't solve the problem, but they're the ones that are helping those conflicting employees to work together towards a resolution. So it's helping them to come up with the resolution. The goal is really to help them understand that other person's perspective and to figure out what the real issues or underlying issues are, and then work together to find a mutually agreeable solution to it. So it's tricky, but there's certainly opportunity there, opportunity for growth, opportunity to improve the team dynamics. I think the second one is self-mediation. And that's when an individual has the skill set to resolve their own conflicts and they don't involve a third party, like a manager or even a professional mediator. So in those instances, that person is wearing 2 hats. They're their negotiator and they're their mediator, right? They're negotiating on their own behalf, and then they're trying to mediate the situation. They're trying to bring the other party in to say, let's resolve this. And so in order to do that, though, it requires self-awareness, emotional intelligence, like we talked about earlier, and effective communication skills. It's all about how we communicate. And that way you get people to work with you and not against you. And I think the third technique is preventive mediation. And so with that, it's about addressing the conflict or the potential of a conflict before it's fully developed. So it's like putting out a spark before it becomes this big old wildfire, right? And the idea is really just to create an environment where the conflicts are less likely to arise. And if they do, they're caught early and they're managed effectively.
So it sounds like to me what you're saying is like really creating a culture that is really hard to create, though. I mean, like, it's like you almost feel like, okay, all right, let's fire everybody and we're going to only rehire people who have these abilities. So, I mean, a lot of people just think they're right.
Yeah.
They just think they're right in a situation. And
what I love about what you described is you were describing productive conflict, right? Because conflict can be good when it helps us have diverse perspectives and it brings in, it's where we get out of the box thinking and alternatives from our either or thinking. But it requires us to have open communication. It requires us to be willing to open the conversation to dissent, but being explicit that we want differing opinions right now. And it requires us, and I love that focus you had of like, we're solving the business problem, right? Like we're disagreeing with purpose, with intent.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love that too, Kenya, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a moment because I'm curious about how successful do you think it is for people to really leave their emotions at the door, so to speak? My experience is, it's much.
So I love that question because it's a reality in the workplace, right? It's a reality in the workplace. There are folks who are just not interested in bringing any kind of emotion to work. Because when they think about bringing emotions to work, they think about a meltdown or breakdown or crying or something like that. And that's where really good, effective, appropriate training comes into play, right? And to your point earlier, Lorin, like you're talking about organizational change. That's what that is, right? And there are processes and frameworks for that. So it's not impossible. We just have to understand what we need to put in place in order to do it. But, going back to the emotion part, that's where the good, effective, right kind of training comes into play, because when you learn, what your triggers are, when you learn what expressing emotion at work really does mean and the benefit of it, then you're able to do it. Expressing emotion at work doesn't have to mean the meltdown, but what it can mean is saying, what you did really bothered me because ABC, XYZ. And I really want to talk about that because, it is impacting the way I'm interacting with you moving forward. It's communicating about the emotions and not necessarily displaying the emotions. And so it's not leaving the emotions completely out of it. It's learning how to utilize them appropriately so that you can shift that conflict from something that's destructive to something that's constructive.
You really made me think of something really important, Kenya, and I love that because one of the things that is so important is that quite often people want other people to change. Like the conflict is not, the reason I'm reacting the way I am is because of what you did. Like we blame others for our own behavior. So the other night, I have a quick story. My husband reacted to something that my middle teenage daughter was saying. And it had something to do with Venmo, right? He's just very like financially paranoid about the internet and stuff like that, or at least things like that. So, but I didn't think it was such a serious statement. So I was kind of like, what are you talking about? And he kept digging in and kept like getting firm. Like he was just and he just got so reactionary. And the rest of us were just reacted back. And so my husband does this quite often when he's really passionate about something. He doesn't just go, hey, calmly, blah, 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 blah. He's like, what? Blah, 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 because he's, Mr. Dad, right? Or Mr. Husband or whatever. He just reacts and we react to him and then it escalates. And I talked to my two kids, like I was really proud. He stormed down the hall. He came back. We kind of talked about it. And I said, you know what? He was mad. He was mad at us. And I was just like, but you're the one that reacted. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? You're right to him. I said, you're right. I said, we need to fix how we react to you because what happens to him is like, just, it's a thing that unless he's going to put a lot of intention to changing, he's always going to, I've known him for 22 years.
Sure.
So instead of trying to change him, because he has to do that. He has to decide if he wants to do that.
Yeah.
We as a family can decide how we're going to react to that. And then that keeps the conflict not at a 10. And we can just decide is how important is this to escalate or not escalate. But my point of my story is that we can't control other people. And I think that's really what people want.
Yeah.
It's like when they're stressed out, they want the stressor to go away, but that's not always possible. So we have to deal with the stress. I think the same thing with conflict.
I agree with you. And I was kind of chuckling as you were telling your story because I thought about my children. I have 2 teenage sons. And knowing what I do, they're constantly, if they're having a disagreement, they're like, please don't come mediate us, mommy.
I get that. Please do. Are you coaching? I don't want you
coaching me. Yeah.
Yeah. Now
don't coach me now.
Don't mediate us. But the good thing is, in that and just in having the exposure. And so similarly for organizations or families or any of the other people that I work with, the first thing I think is to recognize that you are justified in feeling the way you feel about a thing because something has rubbed you the wrong way. And that's your reality. Now that you recognize that, what is it about that thing that triggered you in the first place? So learning and understanding that thing, right? And you may remember, Lorin, I was talking about, what are our default responses to conflict, right? So you all may always kind of say, oh, here dad goes again. And he always say, you don't get me and walk away. If you know that that's your default response and you know that normally it doesn't help the situation out, well, now it's time to take a moment and say, okay, what else can I do? It sounds like that's what you did, right? And then I'm going to take a page, from your book, Naomi, with the empathetic listening, right? Empathetic listening and empathetic communication. And again, that sounds to me like that's what you did, Lorin, right? You said, okay, you know what? Wait a minute. Let me take a minute and let me think about this and why he might be feeling this way and so on and so forth. And you actually came back, which is something I talk about. Take a break, take a breather, and then come back. That's not avoiding, that's taking
Right.
a moment and coming back to
Right,
address
right.
it. But then you recognize, you know what, you're right. You're right about A, B, C, X, Y, Z. So it's a process. It's not something that, you know, we can shift overnight, especially again, if these are our default responses, or this is what we've learned since forever. It takes time, but it also, that's why the training aspect is important. That's why, you know, calling in people who do have the expertise when you don't is important. And that's why, you know, being intentional about being consistent with how, as an organization, you apply this new way of addressing conflicts is important.
I think in Lorin's story and kind of what we've been talking about, also, I just want to bring up what's really striking me now is that the way that you get through conflict is, and working through all these really hard things, right? These are not easy things, is when you have a common goal.
That's right.
Right? If you don't have a common goal, even if it's, you know what, I love you and I want to work this out, if it's a family or if it's in the workplace, yes, we all agree, you know, this is really important for our business or our organization, our clients, our customers, whatever. When you don't have that mutual purpose,
Yeah,
then there's really nothing that really is motivating you to really do the work.
that's right.
So I do think that to me, that seems fundamental.
Sure.
Is that your experience as well, Kenya?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when it's a family situation, and I don't think it's that much different than, you know, when it's an organization. It's really about speaking the same language, right? So as a family, you know, you all agree. I will share this with you. My son would kill me if he knew this, but like you know,
Don't have him listen.
We won't tell him when the podcast is showing.
Don't tell him. But like my oldest son, you know, we had a disagreement because he believed, once he's 18 now, and when he graduated from high school, like the next day, he was like, I'm not doing anything. I've been in school for 13 years and I'm tired. I'm not doing anything. And I'm like, that's not an option. You have to do something. And so we eventually came up with an agreement. If you want to continue to enjoy the lifestyle that you're enjoying living here, then there are conditions. And we actually came up with a written agreement. And the agreement said, if I'm feeling a certain kind of way about a situation, I'm going to take a beat and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about it. And for my other son, he had to agree, I'm not going to trigger my brother. I know how to get under his skin, but I'm not going to do it because I want this to be successful. So it sounds crunchy granola, but this is something that we did because it was something that we needed to do as a family. And then when it comes to organizations, that's why I go back to, you know, making it a part of the culture. When you have training, you know, when you're bringing people in or experts in to train or to assist you, to support you, to help you, it's not something to keep private, like amongst the leadership. It's something to spread out throughout the organization so that in the end, everyone is speaking the same language, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so Kenya, I have a big question. Like, as a lead, so commonly, you know, I've had leaders come to me, and I don't want to speak for Mel and Naomi, but I wouldn't be surprised. One of their biggest stressors are when two people are having conflict on their team, and they and it's been going on for years, like years, right?
Too long, whatever it is.
Way too long. And they can get along enough at work where like nothing's really impacted. So we think, or so anyone thinks. But then the whole team, the whole department, there's just this undercurrent of uncomfortableness. There's no out and out conflict. These people just don't like each other and don't talk to each other. And you know, what do leaders want? Answers, like they want to fix that.
Yeah, I think yes, that is certainly the case. And even again, going back to families, that's the case within families. So that, you know, that's why family mediation exists and those types of things, because there can be these long-standing, long-term disagreements that really impact the way siblings and other family members get along. But when you're thinking about the workplace, I would say, the way this world is going, the way the workplace is going, it's more about wanting to figure out a way to mediate through disagreements instead of finding a way to blame someone or to have someone be the culprit.
Mm-hmm.
It's about figuring out a way to get folks to work together enough so that it's effective and it has a positive impact on the organization. We can't force people to be friends. We can't force people to get along in a way that we want them to. That's just reality.
Right.
But if they're able to work effectively and have a close enough or an effective enough relationship so that they can get the job done, I think that's the lowest hanging fruit that they can have, right? That's the first primary fundamental goal, is just to make sure that they're able to get the work done in a way that's civil. And so that takes me back to the executive mediation that I talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I didn't call it that, but that's when there is an intention by leadership to kind of shift the culture so that we're trying to mediate our conflicts and we're trying to focus on the problem, the business problem, instead of finding a way to write someone up or ultimately terminate someone. And we know, as human resources professionals and leaders, that sometimes it's inevitable. That is going to be the end result. Sometimes this is just not the place for you. As an employee, also, sometimes I can say this is just not the place for me, and we leave. But aside from those instances, I think it's about learning how to shift the culture. And for the leaders, what makes it the executive mediation approach is really understanding that there's a cost associated with the conflict. It really is impacting your bottom line if it's not resolved. And when you become a mediating organization, then that's what demonstrates that those leaders, they're conscious about the return on investment. There's going to be a little bit of a cost to shift that culture, right, to make that organizational change. But in the end, there is a return, and the return is reducing those other cost factors that come out of conflict.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of research on that. And, quite often I hear out of many senior leaders, it's like, just get to work, and like they just wanted to go wish it away, like ding, and that's just not possible. Kenya, we have loved talking with you today. I know I have, but I see with the smiles and nodding with Naomi, we all tend to be on the same page, and we could talk to you for many, many more hours. One last question, as we know that there might be, parents or leaders, or, just non-leaders who want to be leaders at some point, or, people who have impact, maybe entrepreneurs. Anyway, I'm listing all the potential listeners, but what, like right now, they get off this podcast and they go, oh, like, what is one thing you would tell them to do, like, first? Is it a book? Is it a this? Is it a that? I mean, like, or is it an action? Like, what's one thing that they could do immediately right now after this to go towards better conflict?
It's embrace it. It ain't going anywhere.
I love that.
Embrace it. That's the first thing. And then try to figure out how to be the best person that you can be in order to navigate through it in a way that you're able to come out on the other end, and the other person is able to come out on the other end not feeling like they've lost something.
Very powerful.
That's what
I love that. Powerful. That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You ladies are wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
We have we've loved having you,
Lorin.
Kenya.
We could have kept talking forever. Thank you.
We'll definitely have you back again in the future, we hope. So have a really wonderful day, and thanks for your work. Thank you for what you do and for what you bring to the world.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kenya.
Once again, I could talk for hours with her.
Yeah. There was so many more questions I had for her.
It's very heartening to know that there are people like her and her in particular doing the kind of work that they're doing in the world. It really is. It's hopeful.
Yeah.
It's very hopeful.
And it really struck me like the things that she was talking about like the being comfortable that conflict is,
Mm.
these weren't her words, but that it's natural, it happens, right? And then the open communication, and then the knowing yourself piece. And Naomi, I just want to come back to the piece you said about like a common goal, because it feels like in the middle of conflict we lose sight of the fact that the other person wants something too, and how can we figure out what that is and figure out how we align to that. And the research is
Hmm.
quite clear that when we can do that, that breaks down the sense of like othering of other people. That's the fastest way.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
was
Hmm.
really appreciated that piece that you
Hmm.
brought
Mel, I love
Hmm.
that what you just said, really seeking out the commonality, right? To build upon what you and Naomi have just said, finding the commonality, which I think right now is so important. Like finding the humanity and the commonality is that what a lot of people want are very, very, very similar, if not almost exact same. We're just going about it a different way. For example, everyone wants respect, right? At the basic core. And I think so much conflict comes out of maybe that feeling of lack of respect for my viewpoint, my opinions, my fears, my desires, my wants, my wishes, maybe, you know?
I want to
up.
go back to something that Kenya said at the beginning of our conversation, which I think is really important, and that is to recognize that while yes, there are a lot of commonalities, we are all human beings after all. There are some significant differences that also we need to make sure we understand and factor into how we approach conversations and how we show up, because not all of us are the same. Not
Mm,
all of us sit in the systems that we live in the
Right.
same space. Just like in organizations, right? There are people who are closer to power than others, and that's true in the society in general. So it's not to dismiss what you said at all. It's a yes
Yeah.
and. I
Yeah.
just
No,
think
I
that,
agree.
it's something that I think we all need to be aware of as we enter into conversations with people who are not the same as us,
mm,
who have different life experiences.
mm,
So I think, she mentioned that at the beginning of our conversation, and I just think that's, really important
mm.
because for some of us, there's, we need to learn stuff.
Yeah.
We need to learn about other people. We need to learn about other people's experiences in the world. So,
It sounds
You-
like there, Naomi, what you're describing is like our the importance of us staying curious, right? And not making assumptions, but being curious about other people's lived experiences, their upbringing, their perspective of like how when we're in conflict, can we put ourselves in someone else's shoes to try to deepen our understanding? Is that what you're talking about?
it is. That's definitely part of it, Mel. And part of it to me is also taking some responsibility
Mm,
personally and individually to educate myself and understand about other people's experiences in the world that may be different than mine and what they may bring to the table when they're sitting across from me and what I represent to them when I'm sitting across from them.
yeah.
One of the things that I wish I had asked, and maybe, I can earmark this for another day, is, for me, I think right now is I feel I can be empathetic with other people, and I know by nature I'm curious about other people. And Naomi, I have this famous saying, no matter how flat a pancake is, there's always
Yes,
two sides.
yes.
And I take that to heart, and that, there
Hmm.
are so many similarities. But then there are enough different there we're not all clones, right? But one of the challenges I feel like I'm having nowadays is when people, like, one of the things that we've learned before is that facts are facts, right? And those are things that we supposedly couldn't argue about. And opinions are where we tend to disagree and argue. And I said, but nowadays I'm kind of finding myself people putting facts out there and arguing whether that fact is true. or not.
Mhm.
Even if
Yeah.
on the surface it's 100% provable that that's a fact, there are people out there that will say, "Oh no, that's not true."
Mhm. Mhm.
There will be people
Mhm.
right now that will say, oh, this isn't fall right now. This isn't the fall season." But it is. you know I mean, to me, I think that's where so much craziness is going on, at least as far as what I'm seeing, like with the internet and things like that, is that the facts are just becoming so muddy that people aren't believing the truth and the facts. And so I think that's bleeding into other things. I mean, my husband and I had an argument about a fact, and we can't get past it. Like, we've dropped it because of some point it's not that important anymore. But there is a fact that he and I go back and forth with for years, and it's interesting. It's interesting to me.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I think that social media and now truly, I mean, we don't have enough time to go into this for sure, but artificial intelligence and the
Mm,
ability to manipulate the images that we see, the ability to create things that look real that are not, is really going to be challenging for all of us as we go forward. Because you're right, what's real, what's not real, right? What's fact, what's not fact. The ability to, again, to manipulate that is interesting, and it will
yeah.
create more opportunities to, um, to learn how to manage. Yeah, really.
What's interesting about just what I thought of, Naomi, as you just said that is like, so misinformation has always existed, but the speed with which
Yeah.
it can now spread
True.
or happen is just really is something that we're still probably coming to grips with,
Yeah.
figuring out how to
Yeah,
navigate.
Well, one
right.
thing we know for sure is that interpersonal conflict is not going away.
No,
And
no. And
that's at least a
yeah.
place to start, right? And Kenya really gave us some great things, and hopefully for our
Hmm.
listeners too, some
Hmm.
interesting takeaways, and certainly
Hmm.
not the end of the conversation, but
Oh no,
maybe
nothing more.
maybe at least making us more thoughtful about it, and hopefully for our listeners as well. It has been a wonderful time with you guys, as
Yes.
always. I know that you
Yep.
and the three of us could talk for hours as well, but we'll go ahead and sign off for now. And thank you guys for joining me on this ride today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So good to see you all.
Yeah.
Have a
Absolutely.
great, great rest of the day.
You too. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so very much for spending some time with us. We hope you got something out of this episode. Now, if you liked it, do us a huge favor and take a moment and hit the like button. Did you do it? Thanks. Now, are you curious about who is next? Well, then please subscribe to the podcast. It'll help our channel so very much if you do choose to subscribe. Because, of course, the more subscriptions we get, the more opportunities we have to scale up our production, the types of guests we can have, and overall improve on what we can do to make the experience you want and might need. I feel like I sound like a public radio station fundraiser right now. Well, I guess that makes sense because we want you to come back again. So hit that subscribe button. It's super easy. Thanks so much, and we can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of Best Friends at Work.